During the time Sister Christina tried to divorce her husband, she came across other wives in church who were in the same boat. 2 other sisters had heard about her abusive marriage and had come forward to share their stories with her. The first one confessed that she was entirely to blame for her situation, and the second faulted her parents. Both girls told Sister Christina that they had walked down the same road she was on and that in all that time, their church leadership refused to intervene, insisting they maintain their status quo. The one and only justification for refusing intervention was a reference to the scripture, "What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." Her first confidant was Fiona and the other was Natasha. Fiona's South Indian family was originally from Kerala, but she was born and raised in Mumbai. Highly educated, she held tenure as a professor in the prestigious University of Mumbai. As it was with most Malayala girls, Fiona had the usual dark complexion, which in Mumbai whittled away her chances of getting a husband of her choice. Fiona and 4 other girls from the south were determined to break the social and racial barriers and hoped to be able to choose their own spouses. After all, they were all highly educated with decent jobs. All 5 girls vowed not to marry until the gracious Lord answered their prayers. The girls happened to be living in the same building and every Saturday saw them meet up for 1 or 2 hours of praying and devotionals. Each of the Malayala damsels had a list of prerequisites for all prospective husbands. It was their earnest belief that their supplications and fastings would result in favorable divine intervention. Those conditions were religiously and ritually chanted during their prayer meetings. Their first condition, in the order of priority, was that their future husband be fair, tall, and handsome, in one neat package deal. By fair, Indians mean a person having a white or reddish color as opposed to a dark or black complexion. Indian girls prefer being wed to the devil than be tied down to a black person, with the typical Indian boy being even more adamant of this condition. The second condition, of course, was that he be a Malayali. For an Indian girl to say "I want to marry a white or reddish Malayala boy" is an oxymoron. It's akin to describing someone as being a little bit pregnant. Or to quote the classical example, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." Animal Farm by George Orwell. 99.9% of Malayala boys are black. In reality, a combination of the first 2 conditions is next to impossible. All Indians prefer to marry someone from their caste or region because of the inherent cultural, language and food differences. India has the highest diversity in language and religion in the world. The third condition was that he be highly educated. Last and the least, was that he should be Christian, with the last condition not being a major factor because almost all Malayalis are Christian by birth. Fiona and her girlfriends spent days, months, and years waiting for God to grant their petitions favorably. Along the road, each of them received proposals but rejected them all because none of them met with their requirements. After a long and patient wait, Fiona believed that her petition found grace with the good Lord when she met her dream spouse, marrying him in great haste, lest someone else snatch him away. He was fair, tall, handsome, Malayali, and highly educated, with a master's degree tucked under his belt and a professing Christian to boot. She ignored the fact that he was only nominally Christian since the 2 factors in his case at the time were deemed superficial. He was a half-caste, his father a Malayali and his mother a white woman, and which resulted in the reddish hue that he inherited, not unlike that of an Arab. Once he came into her life, Fiona rejoiced and boasted among her friends and relatives. She outlined her plan to subtly change him and satisfy her last conditions for an ideal spouse. "A wise man once told me that a man expects the girl never to change. A girl expects to be able to change a man once they are together. Both are wrong." Those who are less gullible will remember that the Bible reminds us that Satan can masquerade as an angel of light, and in Fiona's case, her new husband turned out to be the devil incarnate. Shortly after their marriage, he demanded his dowry. In India, the bride's family is expected to pay a dowry for the privilege of gaining a son-in-law. In other third-world countries, it's the other way around. Boys pay something as dowry, the exception being the Indians and Ceylonese. Fiona lost her father as a child. Her only guardian was her aged mother. Fiona had quit her job to join the outreach team, working for the Lord without pay. Her husband was jobless. He was not employable because of his drug addictions and his dependence on alcohol. Whenever he felt that his wife had failed his expectations, he would beat her up. His aggression extended to his mother-in-law, fueled by her refusal to sell her home to pay the dowry he felt entitled to. She refused to sell the house because the house was the only roof over their collective heads. Whenever her mother tried to intervene in her daughter's beatings, she also became a victim. Fiona's husband had no qualms about striking old women. After a few years and bearing him 2 daughters, Fiona was forced to face the fact that she had chosen poorly and decided that leaving her abusive marriage and return to steady employment was her best option. Moving forward, her priorities were now raising her daughters and caring for her aged mother. Inexplicably, she would put aside her decision in the hopes that he would somehow turn over a new leaf. She continued to pray and fast for him and their relationship. This time, instead, she prayed, fasted, and petitioned the Lord to get rid of him, instead of keeping him around and changing him for the better. One day her husband returned inebriated and under the influence of drugs, repeating his demands. Met with the refusal to accede, he went into a fit of rage and pummeled both the women mercilessly. It was the final straw for Fiona, who decided to put an end to his presence in her life. She ran to the nearby police station and lodged a report against her husband, claiming attempted murder against both women. That very day, her husband was arrested for the first time and was beaten badly by the Indian police, given their harsh third-degree interrogation methods. Somehow, her husband survived and was released shortly thereafter. He was succinctly ordered, in no uncertain terms, that he was not to go anywhere near his wife or contact her in any way. And that was how Fiona got rid of him. But, Fiona still a young woman and deep down in her heart she longed for a caring and loving husband. She approached the church leadership and demanded a divorce on the basis of physical, emotional, and mental abuse. The church leaders rejected her demand with the usual admonishment. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder, Mark 10:9. Sister Fiona narrated her sad story to Sister Christina tearfully and told her to forget about getting a divorce, and to just walk away. In India, Fiona could have petitioned for a civil judgment and applied for a divorce through the courts. However, she knew that such a divorce would not be recognized by her church, family, relatives, and friends. And if she had to marry another man, she would be considered by all to have entered into an adulterous relationship. The second girl, Natasha, was in the same boat. If Fiona had wed the devil, Natasha's husband was the Antichrist. Natasha came from Gujarat. Like many of the people in her state, she was blessed with a fair complexion, and this bode well for her from a physical point of view. According to her, her parents had thrown her in the well. This dire Indian expression is used to describe the condition of a child suffering abuse in the hands of her parents. Natasha was young and very beautiful. At 18, when her parents had thrown her in the well, her very fair skin and European eyes drew many suitors and admirers. Every boy who saw her fell in love with her charm and beauty. Her parents rejected many of the Gujarati proposals in favor of a mentally retarded boy from Mumbai. He had never been schooled and was illiterate. The only tempting draw factor was the fact that the boy's mother was a rich woman who lived in a resplendent home. A widow with 2 sons and a daughter, with her other children normal. Her daughter lived in the United States of America. Laying claim to an overseas daughter also contributed and enhanced the social status of the widow. In keeping with their position in society, they subtly described their daughter as being so holy and committed that she had married the Lord. In Indian parlance, this means that she became a full-time servant of the Lord, or in Catholic terms, a nun. However, down the road that virgin bride would divorce the Lord and in favor of 2 men. To sweeten the prospect, the woman also enticed Natasha into believing that her son was due to fly to America shortly to be with his sister. She was made to understand that the moment they were married, the couple would travel to the USA and live happily ever after. Natasha did not get a chance to sit and talk to her future husband, and instead put her fate in the hands of her parents, who visited her future in-laws, spending 2 days as guests. Given their visit, her parents obviously could not plead innocence and claim to have been misled. The groom had an obvious mental disability, but the wealth, opulence, and displayed material prosperity had her parents readily agreeing to the marriage. Natasha thus found herself short-changed and saddled with a man with the cognitive abilities of a child. She dutifully accepted her kismet in life and agreed to the union. Not long after, she found out that her husband was not eligible for a visa to go anywhere. In India, a prospective immigrant to the USA had to highly educated or highly skilled, with demonstrable fluency in English with relevant work experience to score enough on his application. Her husband would score 0 in any Western consulate. Once his wife, it became apparent that he was the laughingstock everywhere she went, even in her church. Yes, Indians can be very rude and make fun of the mentally challenged. It came to the point where she hated stepping out of the house with him. Naturally, in India he was not employable, and Natasha readily admitted to Fiona that he hadn't the slightest idea what marriage entailed. Whenever he had the urge, he would just jump over her and to have rudimentary sex. Romance and foreplay were simply not in his vocabulary. Sex with him came to be associated with pain and resentment. When she delivered, the child was found to have inherited his father's mental capacity. Natasha tolerated it all and stayed 10 long years with her husband. Despite her immediate spousal issues, she admitted that during her long and difficult marriage, her real problem was none other than her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law simply eclipsed her husband in cruelty. Although she had married her son, from day one she was told that her real husband was his mother. She simply announced that since her son was not capable of making any decisions, that singular privilege must fall to her. She would inevitably decide the kind of clothes Natasha could wear, what her bedtime would be, when she would be expected to awaken, what she was to eat and when, where she was to go, when and with whom she was expected to travel with. Natasha lived in an Indian ancestral home, which housed, as is common, her mother-in-law, husband, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law. Both, brother and sister-in-law were employed and hence had money to resources to go out to bars and party with friends. Natasha was expressly forbidden to seek employment. This restriction was imposed so that she could not mingle with her male colleagues who were more appealing than her husband, leading to romantic liaisons and possible elopement. All social gatherings were prohibited with the exception of church. She was not allowed trousers, shirts, or short dresses. She was not permitted any makeup or any customary silver or gold ornaments. Her last restriction was that Natasha was to postpone having a child until God somehow worked a miracle and enabled her husband to emigrate to the West. Her mother-in-law simply did not want to feed 3 mouths. Accidents happened and after 4 years she conceived and gave birth to a baby boy. Her role as wife also turned her into an unpaid slave. She was required to rise 4 a.m. to fill the water, wash the dishes, sweep the floors of 3 bedrooms and living room, clean up 3 washrooms, water the plants, etc. 3 times in the week, Natasha had to wash the clothes of her husband, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law and all other linen. The last 2 in-laws were not required to wash their clothes because they were employed and brought money into the house. Often, her mother-in-law placed a huge lock on the door whenever she went out. She was afraid that Natasha might run away or bring a man home in her absence. Her fear was not baseless because many times in anger Natasha had threatened to forsake her mentally challenged husband and run to her family in Gujarat. And that was exactly what eventually happened. After 10 years of toil and suffering, Natasha gained her freedom and ran away for good. It so happened that her mother-in-law allowed her to visit her family during Christmas. No sooner had she reached Gujarat, Natasha told her mother and father that they had thrown her in the well, and regardless of whether they chose to kill her or kick her out on the streets, she was adamant about staying put. Her parents finally admitted their mistake and allowed their daughter to live with them. Natasha tried to get divorced through her church because she was still young and still had a shot at a second chance. Needless to say, the church summarily turned her down because marital infidelity was the only condition that they deemed acceptable as a condition for divorce. Natasha was a different creature from Fiona, who simply evicted her abusive husband and remained single because her church did not grant divorces on the grounds of physical abuse. Natasha went a step further, and after a separation of 3 years she obtained a divorce from the civil courts in her home state of Gujarat. While she had successfully divorced him, her in-laws had put their money to good use to gain permanent custody of her child. Everyone in her church refused to recognize her divorce and warned her against remarrying as long as her husband was still alive. Natasha was bolder than most and simply did not care what her Christian brothers and sisters thought. Shortly after her divorce, she received a proposal from a North American who had also been deceived into marrying a less than ideal spouse. He also was a victim of deception too. He was originally from North Africa. He was a half-caste, his mother was an Arab and his father an African. His Indian wife married him because she wanted to go to the West. As soon as she reached North America, she began to show her true colors. She declared her unwillingness to work, stating that her husband is duty-bound to work and provide for the family. Somehow, she found some women in her church who supported her decision by claiming that the Bible precedence, which calls the husband the breadwinner and the wife the custodian of the house and children. Before marriage she told him she had successfully completed her grade 12, but after he married her he discovered that she was 4th grade dropout. What little education she had received was in Marathi and not in English. He, on the other hand, was a PhD holder and had acquired his master's and doctoral degrees from University of Mumbai. Even so, she looked down on his station and started to treat him as an inferior, calling him Bhoot, or ghost. She refused to allow him to bring his mother from Africa to visit them because she said her children would be afraid of her. In short, she made it very clear to him that he was below her high Indian status. It came to a point when he could not tolerate her arrogance and misbehavior towards him any longer, and he promptly divorced her. He remained single for a few years before he met Natasha and proposed her. Natasha agreed to his proposal, and so he came to India to marry her in a civil ceremony. When Sister Christina became aware of the developments, Natasha had already secured her visa and was due to fly off in a week. Natasha's decision and actions were roundly condemned by many of the church leaders and the laity, and she was flatly told that she was an adulteress. Natasha ignored the clamor and scandal, and as planned, flew to her husband's home to begin her new life. She felt like a Puritan who had just escaped religious persecution and granted refuge in her new haven. Looking ahead to her married life, Natasha's life gushed with a fountain of blessings. She truly enjoyed a happy married life with her new husband in the new word. And the Lord blessed them with 2 lovely daughters and a handsome boy. Now she could eat what she wanted to eat, and sleep, and wake up whenever she decided to, and was free to move about as she pleased. Making up for lost time, she indulged herself with trousers, shirts, pants, bikinis, and makeup. She had her own car. She was also gainfully employed and enjoyed her status as an equal partner to an accomplished author and academician. Her husband has double bachelor's, double master's, and doctorate degrees. He is also an author who published 10 books on the issues of women in Muslim societies and terrorism in Islam. All linkages to her earlier self-image of being thrown into the well had evaporated. Natasha did not look down on her husband's mixed lineage but loved him and always treated him with respect. She often told her relatives and friends that she was honored and proud to be a spouse of a highly educated and loving man. Down the road, Natasha came to know that her cruel ex-mother-in-law had lost all her money and had been forced to sell her home. Her change of fortune saw her living a destitute life, dependent of what money her American daughter sent to her occasionally. Ironically, her daughter had left her service of the church to marry an Indian man, soon divorcing him and eventually, married an American pastor who was also a divorcee. Her other son wasted all her money through bad habits and many failed businesses. He eventually deserted his Christian wife without divorcing her, and married a Hindu woman who dominated and ruled him just like Jezebel ruled and ruined the life of King Ahab. Her grandson, when he grew up, also began to steal her money, and when there was nothing left to steal, he sold the last small house they were living in. Sadly, when that old widow lost it all proved too much and she lost her mind, becoming deaf to the world around her. Finally, she and her mentally challenged son and grandson ended up living in a small rented apartment in one of the farthest and poorest suburbs of Mumbai. In spite of what her ex-mother-in-law and her ex-husband had done to her, when she came to know about their adversity and hardship, Natasha started sending money periodically to help them. The Bible reminds us, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." Romans 12:19. In her new world and wonderful family life, Natasha had changed her statement from "her parents had thrown her in the well," to "from zero to hero."